Okay, so here's where we start. We start with the overtone series. You're going to need some staff paper for this. And my question is, can you write out the overtone series up to at least the fifth or sixth partial, starting on any note? Um, how many say, yeah, I can do that pretty easily? Yeah, Art says yes. Very good. Nina says yes. Here's comes some paper. And if you can't, I'm going to show you how to do it, and I'm going to show you how to do it very easily. Pencils. Yeah, let me get you one. There you go. Anybody else need one?
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so use a grand staff. See if that can work. Okay, so use a grand staff. I'm going to take this off. And we'll start in the key of C. It's not doing real good anymore. Now we'll start with a low C. As in low C, I'm home. Yes, that's one of my bad jokes. Okay. What is the first? Okay, so this is the fundamental or the first partial, right? Let's just review terminology real quick. So an overtone is anything above the fundamental, but the overtones and the first note are all called partials, right? So this is the first partial, is the fundamental. What's the second partial? Yeah. It's the octave up. Let's color them in so you can see them a little better from there. Okay, so now we have two C's. What's the next partial? The third partial. Aaron? The fifth, okay. Now, these are happening because of the physics of how a string vibrates or any vibrating body creates pitch. We're hearing these notes and those notes are existing, but as you go higher and higher, they get softer and softer, right? But they're there. And we can sensitize ourselves to be able to hear them, and that's where we want to start. If we can really hear them, really understand how the overtones sound and why we can hear them so well when they're lower, if you can experience that, you're going to understand this whole theory much better. All right, who's got the next note? We got two answering. Tom, what is it?
Middle C.
It's a middle C. Okay, so it's the next C up. We're up to four partials. Art's got the next one? Okay. Nina wants to answer. Next is the E. Notice it's the major third above C. It's very far away from the fundamental, but we're going to find a way to get those closer together. And what's next partial? Nina's got it. It's G. Now we could keep going all the way up to say the 15th partial, which would take us all the way up to the next C up. But let's just focus on this much because we can hear these pretty well. Now, if you listen really carefully, you might hear the, what are we on? 7th partial, which is kind of like a B flat, but certainly not the B flat that we hear on the piano. It's much more flat than that, but it's there. And you can hear that coming off of a C. If we go up one more, we're back to C. Now, there's a couple things I want you guys to understand. Well, we'll get to that. Okay. So here's what I want you to do. If you can write your overtone series at least up that high, and I'm sure you all can now, if once you memorize this pattern. How do we memorize this pattern? This way. We put our fingers on all the notes this way. Play a low C, maybe with your maybe with your left hand, and then play in your left hand the perfect fifth. These three notes are now on a stack here, and then the next one is also a C and a G, and we add the major third in the middle. We won't do these two up here. Okay, so if I go to the keyboard, I play a low C, hold down the pedal, then I put the perfect fifth in the next octave, then I put a perfect fifth in the next octave, and add the major third. There's my first series of 6 partials, and this is going to be real important. Okay, so can you do this in every key? I would imagine that most of you can. Here's E flat. Here's A. Here's B flat. It's nothing more than finding those triad shapes, right? Go find a piano and mess with that and see if you can get your hands on any key that you want. And take about 3 minutes. All of these, choose a piano that you're going to keep using. You can use the electric ones if you want to also. And just go find one. Go play. Go experience some harmony. Try it in C first. Once that's comfortable, do it in several other keys. Okay, so you just had a harmonic experience, and people were asking, well, why are you telling me to do it in E flat, and why are you telling me to do it in F sharp? And that's those were just examples. You should be able to put your hand on that chord for that chord of 6 notes or 6 partials for every key center, or every fundamental note, rather. Okay, these are not keys, these are overtone series. So you can do it in C and D flat and D and E flat and E and F, all the way up the chromatic scale, right? Okay, and so once you can do that, you start getting an idea of where those notes are. Now, I don't need to play them. I'm playing them just so I can see where they're at. But if I just play one note now, let's go back to our C. And if you listen way up high, you start to hear some of the other notes. You start hearing these. They start to appear. If you listen, it's harder to hear the octaves. It's very easy to hear this G, and I'll say relatively easy. And it's relatively easy to hear that E. You can hear the major triad in the single string. It's there already. Come stand close to the piano. As close as you're comfortable, huh? Do you? Good. You'll tell us in a moment. Now it kind of comes and goes as the vibrations move. Anybody hear this note? Way up there about. How about this note? You hearing that note? It's coming in real strong now for me. Sometimes if you turn your head a little bit, you hear it from different directionality. You hear the ninth? Very good. How about somewhere in here? It starts creating interference, and you start hearing this real wacky vibration. Did you find one? And so you stop listening on the actual level of the first of the fundamental. Well, they're all actual, they're all happening, they're all vibrating in there somewhere, right? So here was my story. I said, okay, I'm about to go see W.A. Matthew for the first time, Aladdin as we call him. And
And I had read two of his books. One was called The Musical Life. And in The Musical Life, he talks a lot about overtones. And so I'm like, okay, this guy's all about overtones. I need to hear these because I'm in my master's program and I've never heard them before. And I don't know what they are because I was not taught that in my undergrad. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go and listen to my voice on the drive from Reno to San Francisco. And I'm just going to sing notes until I hear them in my voice. Sounding out like trumpets is what he said. Now, I have what I consider to be kind of a slow ear. Okay, I've had a late start in music. About the time Art and I were getting together in bands, that's about the time I was really starting to get deeply into music. And that's end of high school. Never sang in high school choir or anything like that, right? So I got this in the 2 hours it took to get from Reno to Sacramento. By Sacramento, I was hearing partials. I was like, yeah, and I'm driving down the freeway, and I'm just doing this for 2 hours, right? It took me 2 hours. I would say if you can't hear them right now, if you're having trouble locating them, go sing for a little while and you're going to find them. If I can do it in 2 hours, you can certainly do it in a week, right? Because let's go on the assumption that probably some of your ears are stronger than mine, and that's fine, right? So just take the time to go and listen to this. Sit at a piano, turn off the light, close your eyes, and start to hear. Acoustic piano is much better than, yeah. Try not to use. Sometimes things get damped out on a keyboard. And pretty soon they start jumping out. And when I was driving that drive, I was like, oh, yeah, there it is. It sounds like it's over here, the fifth. And then I listen over here, it sounds like it's the third, right? And you start to hear the fifth and the third, especially. If you can get to the seventh partial, the B flat-ish note, that's pretty fantastic, right? I can get up to about the eighth partial if I listen really deep. Um, Even beyond. Art said he heard the D, which is the ninth partial, right? So he's already hearing that D. So go find out how many you can hear on a piano or in your voice. Now, gals, you'll have to tell us if it's different singing in your low voice, which is an octave higher than our voice. I think it's easier to hear in the lower range because the overtones won't be quite so high. Once we jump up an octave, your overtones are way up here, and it might be harder to hear. So try it at the piano, but experiment with it and let us know how that feels, right? I'd like to know that, not having a low voice like that. But and if you make it real nasally, okay, I'm going to do this a few times. Close your eyes, listen to my voice, and see if you can locate any of the overtones coming off of my voice. We're now an octave higher than the piano was playing. The piano was on a low C. I'm going to take it on the C above that because I don't have a low C. Anybody hearing that in my voice? Can you hear the fifth? Good. If I start changing the shape of my lips, I'm actually making arpeggios. I'm going dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da dee. So I'm listening way up there and I'm starting to hear those. And if you listen and you experiment with your voice, you might start to hear them too. Listen some more. And again, try changing the direction that the sound is coming from. That helps too sometimes. Yeah, as much air as you have, you just keep trying it, right? And you keep trying it and just sing long notes over and over and over again. And pretty soon they start popping up.
There's a YouTube video, a woman, I think she's German, at least her accent sounds like it, who does this, and they really pop. If you
Mhm.
hear how to do it.
Yeah, and some compositions are written for that kind of singing. They want you to sing those notes of the higher overtone series and enhance them and bring them out. And I don't know exactly how to do that. Have you encountered that before? Yeah, that's pretty wild stuff, right? But you can hear, and sometimes they'll use a tube they'll sing in, or sometimes the resonance in the room will be just right, and you start getting all these crazy notes flying high above. Okay, so let's see if we can induce some overtones with our voices. But before we do that, so what's happening? Here's what's happening. I enjoy it when my physics students come back and tell me, I was in physics class this one time, we talked about the harmonic series. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is an equation in physics. If you have, that's the dead mark. Where did I put it? All right, well, I'll use colors anyway. Okay, so if you have the whole string vibrating, you hear the fundamental, right? But what is also happening is that the string is dividing into two at the same time, because it's not just back and forth, it's kind of all around. And so you've got, it's three-dimensional. So you've got this going, and when you have that going, you have the octave. That's a 2-to-1 ratio for the octave, right? But you also have this going on, a 3-to-1 ratio. It's not really great. But what do you hear when you hear the 3-to-1 ratio? You hear the perfect fifth, right? And then you've got a 4-to-1 ratio. I'm going to put this in blue. I guess I could put that one in blue too. And that's where my drawing gets really bad. Okay, so 4-to-1 ratio. What are you hearing when you're hearing the 4-to-1 ratio?
Octave, second octave.
You're hearing the second octave, yeah, because that's the next one in the series. So this would be another C, right? How about when it starts dividing into 5 equal parts? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is looking very messy. Now you're hearing a 5-to-1 ratio, and that is the E.
And the fifth is a third, and the third is a fifth.
Correct. Fifth is a third, and the third is a fifth, and that's something that we're going to want to get into our way of thinking. Fifths, we have a name for those, and thirds, we have a name for them. I'll give you the third name first. We call it pentamerous. We call it pentamerous because it's the fifth partial. And so any music that has to do with major thirds, not just any thirds, but major thirds, we're going to call pentamerous. And any music that has to do with the 3-to-1 ratio, we're going to call it, anybody? We're going to call it Pythagorean. Totally different, right? Why? Because, did you find that monochord?
Yeah, I found both of them.
Oh, good. Bring one
I
next
just gotta
time.
find the frets.
Okay, so a monochord, which is what legend tells us Pythagoras invented to measure these kinds of things, right? And he discovered that a 3-to-1 ratio creates the perfect fifth. And so we call any music that has to do with perfect fifths Pythagorean. And that's part of the terminology we're going to use in the book. Pentamerous harmony, and yeah.
There's two sides of a triangle too. Pythagorean theorem.
Yes, exactly, exactly, right, okay. So that's what's going on. And our eardrum is vibrating the same way as it's picking up these vibrations coming through the air. And so we're hearing these ratios, and our membranes are moving in those ratios. And so we're going to argue that the ratios are a much better way to name a pitch than is a letter. We call this D. We call this A in the key of C. We call this C. It's much better to say it's a 1-to-1 ratio, or it's a 6-to-1 ratio, or it's a 5-to-1 ratio, because that's going to be more accurate. And this beautiful instrument does not use those ratios. This uses different ratios, and we'll talk about why. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can hear some of these in our voices. Now we know that we can put our fingers on what those actual notes are. We can also hear them in here. Anyway, the famous Leonard Bernstein trick. Okay. I'm going to hold down one of the notes of the overtone series. How about, they're gone. How about the G? I'm going to hold down the G, an octave and a fifth above the fundamental. I'll release that string. Okay, and then I'm going to play the C. Since the G is already in that C, the other string that I'm not really touching is going to start to vibrate in sympathy with this one, because those vibrations come over here and they start shaking that string up, right? We hear the G playing, right? Why is that G now sounding? Because it's contained in the C over here already. Sympathetic vibrations, right? Let's try the E. It's there, but it's much softer, right? So as we keep going high, they get softer and softer. The B flat wouldn't even show up because it's not really that B flat. The one on the piano is so far off that it's not gonna probably ring at all. You're dead silence, right? Yeah. The hammers actually hit the strings, I learned, at 1/7 of the way through, so it dampens off that overtone when it hits, so you don't hear that ringing, because it would create this dissonance and discord in playing that wouldn't be desirable. So they've learned how to put these at 1/7 along the string, right? All right, let's look at the strings. So let's just take our E string. What happens if I divide the string in half? I get the octave. This is what guitar players call playing harmonics, right? Or harp players too. Notice the string is now divided in half, right? So any of these are going to be the octaves of these. Sorry. Good. What if I divide the string in 4 equal parts? Next octave up. There they are, right? It happens to be at the 5th fret. But I could also do it down here. There they are. So I can do it down here too. It's the exact same thing. It's taking a 4th of the string. And what I'm doing is I'm lightly touching the strings, so I dampen off the fundamental. And I allow that next note up, the overtone to sound. The overtone that's in here, anyway, it's in there already, right? So if I damp off the low vibrations, then the high ones keep resounding. What happens if I divide the string into 3 equal parts? I get the 5th. Right, here's the 5th. It happens to be at the 7th fret, and it also happens. There it is. Is that it? It's up there.
14th fret.
Huh?
14th fret.
Is it the 14th fret? And the thing is, the vibrations keep getting softer and softer as you divide the string into smaller and smaller sections, so you don't hear the other overtones as much as they get higher, okay? But what can we really hear well? We can hear the 3rd partial, which is the perfect 5th, and we can hear the 5th partial, which is the major 3rd. We can hear those, and so could the ancients. Before we started doing pianos with equal temperament, we could hear this kind of tuning. We knew exactly where we are in our key, and we knew how those notes related to our key center, right? And when you're talking about, early Gregorian chant and organum, what is organum? Anybody remember music history?
I think that's the melody above the drum.
Yeah, so you hear, it starts to become, you just add the 5th. Why? Because it was already in there and they could hear that. And so someone said, let's write it down and let's start singing it. What happens if we sing, let's all sing Mary Had a Little Lamb. Ready, go. Mary had a little lamb, no harmony, little lamb, little lamb. Good, okay, so describe how we're singing. What are we doing? We are singing in
So
Unison, sort of.
octaves.
We're singing in octaves, right? Why? Because the gals have a voice that is an octave higher than ours, right? So for the men, so we're down here, the gals are up here, and we're singing in octaves. We could hear a 2-to-1 ratio since way back when. Whenever we started singing, we were singing in octaves. You just start singing with a child and you're singing in octaves. You sing with a female, a male and a female sing together, you're singing in octaves, right? 2-to-1 ratio. We get it. We know 2-to-1. 3-to-1 is a little tougher because it starts going a little bit higher, but we can still hear it, right? So, you might say, well, I don't really hear it. But it is there. And if you listen real carefully, let's try it low. You can almost hear the octave and a fifth higher. And if you sit with it long enough, those fifths will start jumping out at you and you start saying, oh yeah, I can hear parallel fifths, what we were told not to use in music theory, right? But they're there in the sound already. They're present in the air, and we can get into those. We can also hear the third above that. So let's see, where would it be? Which would sound really strange because now we're in two different overtone series, and it's as if we're out of key. We're in a different, we're in the key of E up here, and we're then to C, or the key of D, and the key of C, and that's really strange. But it's all there, it's all floating in the air. So the idea is when we used to sing, and our music was a much smaller range, we would sing in just intonation, and we would tune to these perfect fifths, and we would tune to these major thirds all the time. We knew how to do that. As the range started to expand and harmony started to expand and chord choice started to expand, we started saying, okay, well, if we tune our keyboard, which is maybe 4 or 5 octaves, to the overtone series of C, that's all well and good. It sounds great in the key of C. But those ratios don't line up with the key of D, and they don't line up with the key of F sharp, certainly. So when I start playing in those keys, it sounds awful. It sounds out of tune. What are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to try and come up with some kind of compromise that allows us to play in any key we want to and extend our keyboard out further. And so now we're starting to say, okay, look at this. I can play in the key of C, and I can modulate to D, and I can modulate to, I can modulate wherever I want to go by means of a 5/7 chord. And I can keep moving around, and now composers can play around with modulations, and that starts to allow the music to expand even more. And we start getting these, from Mozart 25-minute symphonies to Beethoven 1-hour symphonies and to Mahler 2.5-hour symphonies, right? Mahler, yes. And so the music starts to expand as the harmony and understanding starts to expand. The problem is, we're using a compromised tuning system, which desensitizes our ear to the actual overtonal tunings. And the whole thing about the book is to get back to the overtonal tunings, to understand what that is, which he calls resonance. Resonance is not just, okay, I got my forward resonance when I sing, my guitar has a nice resonance because it's a big body and a certain kind of wood and stuff like this. It's the art of being in tune to the overtone series in just intonation. And then we start to find that has to reconcile itself with equal temperament, this beast of a tuning system that we have developed and use beautifully for the past, 100 years. Bach was already messing around with different kinds of tunings, and he tuned his own keyboards. So he was messing around with tunings that would allow him to play in all keys. It wasn't equal temperament, it was well-tempered, right? Hence the Well-Tempered Clavier books 1 and 2, because now he can play in every key he wants to and write a piece in every key. But Bach understood where he was in the overtonal tunings, and you can tell by the way his manuscripts look. He wrote all of his notes in the right place with the right spellings. If it's an F sharp, it's an F sharp. It's not a G flat. If it's a G flat, it's not an F sharp. Those two notes were different. And he understood this because you never see any spelling errors in Bach. But by Mozart, in Beethoven, and beyond, you see lots of spelling problems. You see notes that are D sharps called E flats, and they're not. And it might be the publishers saying, well, it looks better on the page if you call it a D sharp instead of an E flat, right? But in the world of tuning and understanding what the actual note is, I go with the correct spelling every time. At least I try to, right?
Do you think that singers and instrumentalists who have some flexibility in tuning um, tend to go to just tuning when they play or sing?
I think they do. And part of the premise of the book is that they do. So whether you're a violinist who can tip your finger just a little bit and get a shade of tuning, or whether you're a singer and you can adjust that, or whether you're a sitar player and you can stretch your string as far as a perfect fifth if you want to, 7 half steps, you can get shades of tuning in between. And I think we like that and we understand that. I think it's hardwired into our brain.
I think of Stan Kenton's brass section.
Yeah.
They just played in perfect tune.
You know, Alaudin played in San Ken's brass section.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was a third trumpet for a while, but he was more of an arranger, he said, than a trumpet player. So they kept him on. And there's a whole album, Standards in Silhouette, which Alaudin arranged the whole thing, a bunch of ballads for Stan Kenton. Yeah.
So are you saying that every human has this innate thing of just intonation?
I think we do.
Okay.
I think it's hardwired in our ancient brain,
Mhm.
actually. And I think when my kids sing in tune all the time, it's because they understand this on some level, even though I don't talk about it.
Because it just sounds better.
It sounds better.
Right.
It sounds better. Yeah.
I think when we see an F sharp or a G flat, it automatically subconsciously has a different shape to it.
Yeah.
Like the F sharp is higher, if you want to say brighter,
Hmm.
than the G flat, even though they're the same, it sounds darker.
Yeah.
Then.
And I'll say that if we're in a center of pitch like C, those are two actual distinct vibrational pitches.
Mm.
They're not the same amount of vibrations going on
So
here.
it depends on the reference point and whether you're going upwards or.
Correct. The reference point is everything. If you're in a key center, that's why this is all about tonal harmony. There's an important tone for your key. Then all the notes are swirling around that. And you don't just have F sharp and G flat being different in the key of C. You have certain notes that are different even with the same letter. Okay, so I can sing the equal tempered E, or I can sing the just intonation overtone that I hear in the overtone series. I can sing that one, and it's going to be a different tuning than the one on the piano. So let's do some more experience. Here we go. Let's see, all guys go, or basses go. Oh. Tenors go. Oh. And altos go. Oh. Now, real nasally and as loud as you can. There we go. Just take a breath and keep coming back in. Can you make it a little more nasally? There it is. Okay, when I do this with my class, I start to tell them, I go, okay, now I told you guys to sing these 3 notes, but someone's singing this note. Stop singing it. And they all start looking at each other like, who's singing that note? Somebody's singing that note, right? Now it took a while, but it finally came back to my ear, and I heard it over here somewhere. I heard, or even an octave higher. I heard that way up there. Do it again and see if you can find that note. Sopranos can even sing if you want to. Anybody hearing the 5th partial, which is up there, right? And so you start to hear, when you got more kids too, sometimes I hear it more. I'm not hearing it real pronounced, but it's there. I can hear it. It comes and goes, right? And so sensitizing your ear to hear that tuning. Now, everyone sing do in your octave. Just sing that note, do re mi. And you let your voice relax into it. Kind of sing ooh or sing e, whatever you like. And you start to feel this almost buzz that fits somewhere neatly into that sound on the piano. It feels a certain way. Make a note of how that feels. Does it feel warm? Does it feel unsettling? Does it feel off-putting? Does it feel right? And any adjectives that you want, singing that third. Now, knowing how that feels, did you all click an adjective in your mind? You all have an adjective for how that feels? Yeah, if you don't, get one real quick. What does that feel like? For me, it feels warm. I think of warm when I hear that. Now, listen to the piano's E. Does that feel the same? It's very jarring. It sounds like this, right? Why? Because this E is not, it's sharp, right? It's tuned sharp on purpose. It's tuned sharp by how much? 2 cents? Let's talk about cents, okay. In the equal tempered tuning system that we use every day and love and hate, every half step is stretched to 100 cents up or down in order to make them all equal. Okay. How many cents in an octave? 1200. 12 notes in the chromatic scale, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so 100 cents. How many cents in a perfect fifth? 700. 7 half steps. How many cents in a major third? 400. From C to E, 400, right? So 4 half steps. How about from C to D? 200. How about C to D flat? 100. Okay, so every half step is 100 cents. A major third then is 400 cents on the piano. But the overtonal E that we just sang is 386. 386 cents. So it's off by 14 cents out of 400.
C is 100.
C would be 0. Go from C to the next one.
I'm thinking of frequencies.
Oh, oh yeah, no, we're not talking about frequencies. We're talking about the space from one note to the next on the piano. Yeah, okay. Frequencies is what the overtone is doing, and that's what we're going to hear the difference between the two. Okay, so there's two different E's that we can be singing. And I found this very interesting. Many years ago, Daryl was playing, we were doing a concert with Daryl and the guitar orchestra from Cal State Fullerton. And they had our ukulele ensemble as a special guest. Remember that, Daryl?
Yeah.
You got us to come out and play for that concert. And it was a thrill to be playing an opening act for these guys who were nuts, great, and amazing. And like 17 classical guitarists who were just phenomenal, you know, played as an orchestra. And I asked Daryl about its tuning, and I said, so how do you tune your guitar, Daryl? And I was asking if he knew any of this kind of stuff, and he goes, oh, I just listen, and it feels right, then it's right? So, okay, let's take the key of C. Sound pretty in tune? How about that E on top? It's a major third. Okay, Tom's cringing. Does it sound too high or too low?
Too low.
Now, see, I get sensitized to the just tunings, and I like that E to be lower when I'm playing the key of C. Because I go back to that warmer feeling, right? But the problem is, once I tune this to the key of C, that's great if I end on the key of C. But what if I now switch to the key of A? Okay, this E is now the third of C. Okay, this is my C chord if you're a guitar player. If not, it's okay. This is an A chord, and the third, that E now becomes the fifth. Now it sounds bad, right?
Multiply that by 17.
There, okay, so that's better. That's a better perfect fifth against the A, right? But if I go back to the key of C, doesn't sound right. So there's a problem, right? Because I'm dealing with 6 different overtone series right here. And if I tune it to one, the other one's not going to sound so good, which is why they had to take the piano and they had to divide them into 100 equal cents all the way across, detuning certain notes, sharp or flat, to make it sing in every key, right? And the old adage, as I told Daryl, is guitar players spend half their time tuning and the other half playing out of tune. That's
If
right.
you added all the errors and divided it by 12, that's kind of like evenly distributed.
Yeah,
But stretched in.
but some will be stretched more and some will be stretched less. And that major third is a big one, right? I've had a lot of talks about this with my student Andrew, who may be a new choral director as of today, because he's on his 4th interview at the same location. 4? What do they not know about you in 3 interviews? And you've already conducted and had a lengthy interview, and they want you back for a 4th interview. So he had a 12 o'clock. Otherwise, he would have been here with us today. But we've been talking about this kind of stuff for years. And he would sing in college choir, and they were doing these big, tall chords. And the conductor, I will not name, that he was working with at the moment, was saying, you guys are flat on your third. Sing it higher. And Andrew's like, no, it's supposed to be like that. He's hearing the just tunings. Andrew is, right? But the conductor, who hasn't been trained, I gather most have not been trained in this to hear these differences, right? And so no fault on theirs. It's not part of the pedagogy that's out there in the United States. People are not
Assuming
talking
they-
about
they
this.
do a cappella, not without any instrument.
That's a good question. I don't know if it was acapella or not, because once you're doing along with instruments, okay, are you doing it with the piano, which is equal tempered, in which case some of our tunings, you ever notice when someone's supposed to be doing an acapella piece and someone's playing along with them, doesn't sound so great until you take that piano away and you allow them to sing the natural tunings that just come intuitively, right? And it sounds so much better once you get off the piano. I'm always impressed at Tom, the way he teaches the students barbershop, because he doesn't play the piano there for them. He might give them a few notes, but he's expecting them to hear it and sing it. And I love that about Tom and about barbershoppers, that they do a lot of that. So why? Because the natural tunings sound better than the piano tunings. And so if you're going to sing it a cappella anyway, get rid of the piano. But what if you're playing with a string orchestra? What if you're singing with a string orchestra? All the strings are variable pitch. There's no frets on those instruments. So they can use their intuition to change the shading of the pitch as they're going, and they don't even know they're doing it, which is pretty awesome. It's just because they're really in tune ears that know what sounds good and what feels good. So a lot of the experience that we're going for is how do we feel this? How does it feel to us? What was the adjective you had for your major third? Mine was warm.
Square.
Square.
Symmetric.
Buzzing.
Locked.
Locked.
Buzzing.
Buzzing. Okay.
What was the question?
Did you have an adjective for your major third when we were singing it?
Correct, I guess.
Correct. Okay. Which is consistent with what you told me 10 years ago. Yeah.
Right.
Firm.
Firm. Okay. So whatever that feels like and sounds like to you, you realize that this is not it. It's a different affect, we call it, right? It's got a different, it creates a different response in you. It feels different. And you start to fall in love with those just tunings, and you say, they feel really good and they sound really good. And maybe they don't. And maybe you want to keep listening to it more and more and start to get used to it, right? That's what this is all about. Then we start to discover that when you're playing an equal temperament on a really well-tuned piano, you can sense these pitch differences even though they're not there. I did this experiment with my boys this past week because one of my boys has perfect pitch. And I was curious as to how he would hear pitches that were justly tuned. Would they sound wrong to him? Has he memorized a certain frequency in his brain since he was a little kid when he took piano for 5 years? Is that why he has perfect pitch? And if I give him a different pitch that is still let's say a D in the key of C, if it's still a D, will he hear it as higher or lower or out of tune? And he got it right. And my little one heard it too. Well, he's not so little, he's 14 now, but he heard it too. He's like, yeah, I hear that. I hear a difference in the pitch, right? And so let's try that. You guys can sit. You've been standing all this time.
Is perfect pitch really, I mean, I know you're born with it too, but would it be assimilated, just memorization of pitches?
I've had to come to some different realizations as I saw it happen in Joseph. He took piano when he was 4.5. He started. He played for 5 years, and he's got perfect pitch. The other two boys didn't develop it. They didn't play as long as him either. But are people born with it? I think very few people are born with it. I think it's early exposure to music that helps you to memorize those frequencies.
That makes me think of my mom. It's like, was she really born with it, or because of the constant pianos and stuff like that, that she just assimilated it like
Yeah.
songs, just memorization of the pitches?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. That's why I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm curious too. And it might be different for different people. You know, when I was in college, there was this thing that came out in a magazine. It said, if you use my method, you will develop a perfect pitch by latching onto colors in the music and stuff like this, actual visualizing of colors and things. And you take this tape and you listen to it and you will develop perfect pitch. And I showed it to my composition teacher and he's like, you don't need that. You don't need that. Just have good relative pitch and develop your ear. That's really all you need, right? Perfect pitch is a phenomenon, but it's not necessarily, it's a blessing and a curse. I'm sure you've all heard the stories, right? Not to mention, some studies I'm hearing about are saying that every 40 years or so, your perfect pitch is kind of dropping as you get older. And so you get to be about 40 years old and you notice that you're about a half step off. And now it's incredibly difficult because you're looking at a score, you're singing a score if you're a singer, and you're seeing the A on the page, but you're hearing it as an A flat. And now everyone sounds like they're out of tune and it drives you bananas. Now you're 80 years old and you're a whole step off. So I don't know. I don't have perfect pitch, but I realize that I'm consistently about a whole step off when I try and guess. How do I guess? I listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Oh, that should be a D. I was a half step off, right? Why am I always consistently a half step or a whole step off? Well, I'm a 52. Maybe that's why. What a drag. Another friend of mine used to carry around a tuning fork in his car all the time. And it's stuck in traffic. He'd just keep listening to C over and over again to see if he could memorize that pitch. And I think kids might be able to do this. You know, sometimes you can teach your kids, okay, everybody, this is what the basses, tenors, altos, sopranos. When I give the major third to my choirs, I don't play it on the piano. Because if they're going to sing a cappella and I give them the F sharp that's too high, they're not going to sound right. I'll always go, okay, here's your pitch. Basses, tenors, altos, sopranos. And I'll give them that pitch. That's the pitch they'll memorize and they'll take, right? And then I'll do this for a while. Okay, so everybody sing that chord and we'll sing that chord. And sometimes it takes them a while to find it, but as a class, they start to find it without any help from the piano. Come back tomorrow, let's try it again. Come back tomorrow, and if they can memorize the D major chord, then we can find our way through music. And kids can memorize this a lot faster than we can. And it's very interesting to see that happen. So, perfect pitch, I don't know. Are we born with it? Is it because of I rather think it's more about exposure early on than it is to, I mean, there's geniuses who start playing the piano at 2 years old and they're playing all this amazing music and we don't know where that's coming from. Where is that coming from? How can they do that? They've never taken lessons. They can just play anything, right? The brain's an amazing thing. Well, we don't know how it works. Aladdin said the next book after this one would be one on he said the book stops here because the next book on neurology would be next, and no one knows enough about it to write that book. That's what he told me the other day. He goes, so how do we perceive music? That's why we all had our own adjective about how something feels or sounds. We all hear music differently. Okay. Where was I going? I was going to do an exercise. Okay. Let's see if I can find that exercise. Oh, we haven't even touched the lattice yet, but we will. That'll be next week. There we go. Okay, let's sing this. Let's go. I'll write on the board. It's going to be notes. Yeah. Thank you. I work on that. I've been doing that for years. Where's my black marker?
Oh, it's under the pen.
Oh, yes, I remember now. Thank you. Okay, so let's sing these notes. E, A, tie it over to another A, and then B. One year I had a tenor and a bass who had perfect pitch. And my choirs were so spot in tune all the time because the sopranos and altos could latch onto the men's sections and they could sing beautifully in tune because they could sing into those overtones that the guys were setting up. It was really, really cool. I got lucky that year. Mi, la, ti, do. You just sing ah if you're not comfortable with solfege. And we'll go backwards, okay? So let's all sing together. Mi, la, ti, do, ti, la, mi, la. We'll go to here and do the repeat. That's what we'll do. And then we'll do that over and over again. Okay? Good. Sing nice and strong. Sit up nice and tall. Here we go. And mi, la, ti, do, ti, la, mi, la, ti, do, ti, la, mi. Two more times. La, ti, do, ti, la, mi, la, ti, do, ti, la, mi. Okay, so all of these notes are going to be related to the bass notes that I'm playing by perfect fifths and major thirds, okay? And when we hear, and sometimes they're going to change in the act of singing it. I want you to pay particular attention to what's happening here on the carryover when we get there and when we get here. Is it the same pitch or does it change? I hate to tell you, but come back to the piano and stand up here with me again. I'm not going to play it on the piano. I'm just going to play the bass notes on the piano. Okay. Here we go. 2, 3, and mi, la, ti, do, ti, la, 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 mi. Do you sense anything where the arrows are? What are you sensing?
So the second note of the la feels like it finally fits in. It's like before it's kind of fighting and then it settles in and then it's like, okay, now we go on. And then on the way back,
So this one feels like it fits in.
yeah, and then on the way back, it's also the second one that settles in.
Seems to settle in. Okay, very good. Anybody else? Well, Aaron.
Yeah, it seems to settle. For me, it felt like it was locking upward into that.
Okay.
So each time it's like that, like law wanting to resolve the T, but the second one wanted it more.
Okay. All right, very good. Anybody else? What are you experiencing?
Yeah, it's like I almost want to retune that ever so slightly when you go to the second chord.
Okay.
The second chord, that A acts like a third, and it's different when
Very good. You see, I love teaching smart people. So here are the notes you're hearing. You're hearing C, which means we got a major third, right? We get that warm, buzzy, solid, square feeling that you were sensing. And then we go to, let's see, we go to F. And we hear a major third there. A is the major third above F, right? And then, what do we have? Perfect fifth from B to A, right? So this A is going to be sensed differently from the context of this F and this A.
Could
Okay.
could we play it again, but play the upper octave F? See if that makes a difference.
Sure. And let me just finish off real quick. So we go from D and we go to a G, so I'll even put that one up an octave. And we've got another major third. So we have three major thirds and one perfect fifth, right? Okay, and we call major third music pentamerous because it's the fifth partial, and we call perfect fifth music Pythagorean, right? That term, keep coming back. I'll keep hitting you with it, so you'll start to say, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about. Okay, go ahead and sing it. I'll play the upper octaves of the G's and the F's. Ready? And mi, la, ti, do, ti, la, 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 mi. What do you notice there? Does it feel the same?
It's a little less jarring, I think.
A little less
A
jarring.
little less the feeling like it doesn't fit as much, but it still has a little resolve, I think.
Okay. Hi, Marcelo. We've got a new student 10 minutes from the end of class. Good to see you, sir. Hey, this whole thing I'm going to be posting, and I'll send you a link to the site where it's going to be, and then you can go back and watch it. Marcel is teaching still. He hasn't gone to summer break yet. And so you're welcome to stay here, but we'll be finishing up in a couple of minutes here. So
Sounds good.
okay. So that's good. Okay, so you're feeling differences. Anybody else? What did Daryl or Tom or
I just
Vanessa
kind of
feel?
felt the second A was like the second half of it was a little bit more open than the second half of the second A. And I didn't know if that was just maybe because since we're going up,
Uh-huh.
we're kind of thinking about like individually,
Yeah.
you know, or that's just what I was hearing, like, it's kind of what I felt.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like coming down on the A, I did kind of feel like this time we landed all more on the same A
Mm-hmm.
that we did the first time.
Okay, very
Not
good.
that we were like out, but like, it felt just more, it felt tighter.
Mm-hmm. Tom or Vanessa? More consonant. Which one, the arrow or the pre-arrow? The arrow sounded more consonant. Mm-hmm. Good. Tom?
You know, I had somebody tell me once, oh, when you held over that note and the chord changed, you adjusted the pitch to fit the new chord. And I said, I did. In experience here, I did. Because apparently I do it, but I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And that's what good in-tune singers do. They adjust the pitch while we're singing a piece. So what happens if there's kids not adjusting the pitch in your choir? we start getting this out of tuneness, right? Starts to develop. If you could, as a conductor, show a gesture or guide them into a different kind of vocal production that's going to allow them to relax their voice, to relax into that new tuning without having to tell them so, wouldn't that be fantastic? That'd be great. That's part of the art of conducting, right? And a lot of conductors don't even know they're doing this, right? But they change shape, they do things like this, and different things happen that they're getting the oral feedback, and they say, yes, that sounds right. They may not know why and the numbers and all that stuff, but that's why this book is so valuable. It teaches you all that and how that works, right? And then you go and experiment with what you learn. You don't need to know all this. You can do it anyway, and you probably do it intuitively anyway as singers, right? Because you're good ears and good musicians. We're talking, Marcelo, about as we perform this little piece right here, that tied over A at the arrow seems to change, and we want to know why that's changing and what's happening there. I'll finish writing that out. So then we've got, what do we go back down to C? There's an octave. And then, where do I go? Let me make sure I read it right. And then here's the lower one, here's the G, and then D. F. So when that A is related to the F by a major third, you're getting a different affect than you're getting when it's related to the A. That's the whole point of the book, right? You're hearing these in overtonal tunings, because I'm not playing them on the piano for you. I'm just playing the context by playing the bass, right? Okay. All right. We're going to stop there, folks. Why don't you go ahead and have a seat? Now, if today overwhelms you, that's great. If you go and you think about it for a week and you start to come up with questions, of course, you all have my text. You can send me messages at any time or emails, and I'll be happy to get on and talk with you more about it. Or you can just bring those questions to next week. You know, I'm open as far as whenever you want to communicate with me. Send me something at 1 in the morning. I'm probably awake, right? And that's I don't care when you send it. So if you've got questions, that's great. We're going to go into finding out more how all the notes are related and how we can figure out where the context is. But we just sang in the key of C with 2 different A's is what we did. And guess what? That's an actual vibrational difference in the 2 A's. It's not the same pitch. They're both called A, but they sound different, or at least they feel different, right? And they are a numerical difference in vibrations, which we'll talk more about next time. Okay, what I want to do, yes, Nina.
I was thinking as we were going through, so the fifth are diagonally, right?
Yes.
It's interesting that they forbid parallel fifths and
Major third music starts to develop as you start getting more into the late 1800s, and the composers start using those kind of modulations, using lots of major third moves. I'm in the key of C and now I'm in the key of A flat, right? It's not as obvious as going from the key of C to the key of G. That would be Pythagorean. The whole idea behind why are perfect fifths not supposed to be used in music theory, when we're learning that and we take our theory class, I think you've all had at least theory 1, right? Did you take both years of theory, Art?
Mhm.
You did. Okay, so you've all had 2 years of theory at least. Did you take them, Tom?
I took 1 year theory.
You took a 1-year theory. Okay. We learn about perfect fifths being bad, right? It's not that they're bad, it's that they don't fit the style. The composers weren't using them as much. Why not? Because in the time that music theory was becoming codified, they wanted independence of parts. They wanted the parts to sound individual. And so when you write a chorale or you write a piece of polyphony, you want those lines, bless you, to sound different. So this is not independent at all. That's 2 parts that are not independent.
And you can't tell the tonal sound.
You almost can't tell the tonal center. You almost can't tell, which line is which. You try and sing it, and you test this with kids, and they're like, they say, sing the top line, and they sing the bottom line, or sing the bottom line, and they sing the top line because they're hearing the parallelism. That wrecks the independence of those two parts. So it's not that perfect fifths are bad. If you like big fat chords, then that's fine. Use big fat chords of perfect fifths if you want that sound. But if you like jazz does, but if you want independence of parts, polyphony, then you have to follow certain rules because the masters knew how to do that. I have a beautiful example. I still got a frame for my studio at home of a Bach partita where he does 4-chord perfect fifth in the bass, 5-chord perfect fifth in the bass. There's no hiding at all. It's and I mean, it's just right smack in your face. He wanted that sonority at that time, so he used it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's brilliant, in fact.
Because it studied that theory that they came up with in the 18th century.
That's very good. Okay. Yeah, that's in the overtone series. If you go high enough, that F sharp is in the overtone series. And you know what note you will never find in the overtone series? Anybody know? You play this. What note will you never find in the overtone series? Which one? You will find a B natural. It's about the 14th partial. You will find the F sharp. You'll never find Fa. You'll never find the F. It never appears. Oh, wow. And we'll talk more about that. That's part of the whole overtone story to get it and to remind me to talk about that next time. Why is Fa not there? And we'll start looking at numbers and ratios and how that works. Now, I'm going to stop recording. Everybody have a great time, and we'll pick up next week.